Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Dementia Researcher Salon Debate. I'm Adam Smith. I'm the Programme Director for Dementia Researcher, and I'll be your host once again for the next hour. If you're watching this and you'd like to host one of these debates, do get in touch because I'm very open to sharing the responsibility. So do get in touch. But thank you very much for joining us here this evening in the Dementia Researcher community. And tonight's motion takes on one of the biggest questions um, in science and how it operates. This house believes that grant funding should be distributed by lottery and not by peer review. With increasing concern about bias, inefficiency, and inequality in peer review process, some have suggested that random allocation or partial lotteries could be a fairer, more innovative alternative to the usual system. But replacing peer review with chance, would it undermine quality? Would it undermine merit? Or could it create a more inclusive and dynamic research environment? Joining me this evening to debate these two issues are our two shy debaters. We have Dr. Byron Creese, who is a senior lecturer and director of research at Brunel University of London. His research focuses on biological basis of neuropsychiatric symptoms in dementia and related disorders, and he leads several multidisciplinary collaborations and is interested in how funding structures shape creativity and equity in science. Hello, Byron. Nice to see you.
Hello,
Hello.
Adam. Hi,
And
everyone.
speaking against the motion, we have Subhashisa Swain, who is an NIHR ARC postdoctoral research fellow based jointly at the University in Oxford and Keele University. A physiotherapist and epidemiologist by training, his research focuses on dementia, aging, multimorbidity, and musculoskeletal conditions. He uses large electronic health records and advanced statistical methods to explore health trajectories and improve care. And he's going to argue against that motion this evening. Hi, Subhashish.
Hello.
There we go. So if you've not been here before, let me explain the format to you. Both of our debaters, starting with Byron, will get 10 minutes each to make their case. There'll then be a short rebuttal where they can respond to each other's points. We'll then have a chance for me to raise a few issues to try and tease out the conversation. We'll have some Q&A where you can put your questions as well to them. And right at the very start, right now, and at the end, we're going to ask our audience to vote. So you can tell us which side of this debate you fall on. And then we'll do this again at the very end to see if the arguments you've heard have swayed you in any way at all. So there's a link in the chat right now. No, there isn't. I'd already posted a link to the chat. I'm going to post a link right now in the chat, which is there. And you can click that link in the chat to go away and vote. And while we're waiting, I'm going to share the screen so we can see the live voting as it comes in. And here we go. Let's have a look at how things sit at the start. Ooh, 67% so far agreeing with the House, which is that research funding could be decided by lottery. Ooh, we've got a little bit of movement there. Ooh, people. What's interesting this time around compared to most of our debates so far is that the audience definitely has an opinion and isn't undecided. So 50-50. We go slightly more. Well, there we go. I'm going to leave voting open for a little while. So at the moment, the House has it. So Byron, you're winning at the moment with 57% of the vote. All to play for, Subhashish. You've got the some people to swing over to your way of thinking. But that's enough for me. I'm going to invite Byron to make your case. Let me get my timer ready. I'll leave voting open just for another 30 seconds. But Byron, over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Adam, and thanks for the introduction. So my background is psychology. And I'm coming at this from a perspective of having been fortunate enough to receive funding under a peer review process, and also be part of the a reviewer as well. So both sides. Um, and I'm interested, I think, like a lot of people, in wanting to promote equity in research funding. But I have to say, I didn't realize how interested I was until I started looking into this in a bit of detail. So I'm looking forward to sharing those thoughts with you. Um, First thing is, peer review's not a far away fantasy. Some form of lottery to distribute research funding has been used in New Zealand and the UK. The British Academy does it for some small grants. And also, I think, in Austria. These mechanisms for distributing funding are known as partial lotteries, um, where there is some degree of quality check, and then funding is randomized across those projects that have met that check. Um, I'm going to just go a step further and argue that, why don't we think about a full lottery? This is where qualified, let's say researchers have to be qualified, but there is then a completely random distribution of money um, for people who have submitted projects. Why do I think this? Well, any form of quality check will introduce bias. And the whole point of a lottery, I think, is to remove that bias. So this is my first point. We are all biased. I don't think that's controversial. We would like to believe that we are not. And I think a lot of people want to manage their bias. But unfortunately, it influences everything we do. And I won't go through the list, but that extends to uh, peer review as well. There's some evidence that funding rates and grant sizes are higher for male rather than female applicants, although there is some evidence to the contrary. But there's more robust evidence that having prior links with panel members is helpful in obtaining grants. So I think we could all agree we want to get rid of that. And to illustrate why peer review is an imperfect system and one that leads to those biases, if I asked you to think about this a minute and just do a thought experiment, if I asked you to create a system, okay, that had the appearances of being transparent and could plausibly be defended as such, but by design, I wanted you to allow biases to creep in unchecked, and I even want a system that facilitates some cronyism if possible. I reckon most people would come up with something that looked a bit like peer review. Why is that? Well, you want to make a system that is, on the surface of it, fairly unreliable, um, uh, but all of the perceived unfairness can be put down to factors that are hard to address or disprove. So, for example, oh, well, all of the funding is going to people with certain characteristics. Yes, but they met our benchmark for being the most qualified candidates. Now, I'm not saying anyone designed it to be this way. That's just a thought experiment. And I know people on grant panels, and there's absolutely no evidence that I've seen that people behave unethically. What I mean is that there's always these unconscious biases that come in. Um, but you simply can't tackle it in the peer review system. And I think just thinking about, how you would design a system if you really wanted to introduce bias, I think we'd all end up with something that looks like peer review, and that tells us it's not the perfect system. Um, there's biases in the review process, but there's also biases in who does the peer review. So I've been told anecdotally that for for one research council in the UK, for every one review that's done, they have to send out 25 review invitations. So that means who's selecting to do that review? Is there bias there as well? Um, uh, so we can probably all agree that we don't want bias, and I think a full lottery is the only way to completely remove it. Secondly, I think peer review, there's an argument that it stifles innovation. And this is because of groupthink, um, and also because of the slow pace of funding. So peer reviews, often reliant on volunteering time, um, and um, and therefore it can be slow. Might take 6 months to get a decision, another year to set up contracts. Could be 18 months before you start your project from the initial submission of the grant, let alone the writing in preparation for that. There's a case which many of us might be familiar with, a case that many of us might be familiar with is that of Katalin Kariko, whose research helped develop mRNA vaccines that were used in COVID. She spent years and years writing grants and getting them rejected. Would she have got her funding if a lottery system were in place and she entered every year? Well, who knows? But would she have had more time to spend on her research rather than writing grants for it if we had a lottery system? I think she probably would. And this is just one case that we know about, and it's one case where she managed to get some research done in spite of the peer review system. So imagine all the other cases there are out there where ideas have just had to be dropped because of rejection, because of not having enough time to write grants and so on. The third thing is that getting grants has almost become the career outcome rather than the science itself. So let's make our careers about doing science rather than getting the money per se. To support that, there's some evidence that peer review is a weak predictor of future performance. So some studies have looked at the percentile score, the percentile rank of funded applications, and gone on to look at some bibliometric performance and found no association between the score that the application received and the kind of citation performance later on. And I know there's maybe some limitations with that approach, but it sort of suggests that funding does not equal performance or research output. So there's lots of funding studies that might not live up to their promise, which would suggest as well that there's lots of unfunded studies which really would have a lot of promise. And peer review doesn't allow us to get to those studies. Lastly, resources. Peer review is hugely resource intensive. There's the preparation of the applications, but then there's the review itself. So there's burden both on applicants and institutions that support those applicants and the funding body itself. Some data extrapolated from research councils, UK research councils, suggests that the costs of the application process are 10 to 17% of the total costs of research. I would argue that let's take that 10 to 17%, put it to one side so that people who are successful in the lottery can be given training in project management and finance management that would allow them to successfully deliver their projects. That sort of training is not really systematically or universally available, and it's a huge part of what we do in delivering research is effectively managing projects, people, and money. And as scientists, it's not part of our education, and there should be more funding for it, and I think it could come from there. And that really sums it up for me. I think in terms of why we should do a lottery, it's to do with reducing bias, increasing innovation, a focus on science rather than getting funding in terms of our career outcome, and a better use of resources. Thank you.
Good arguments. And now we're going to hear from Subhashisa, who's going to make the case for the other side. Over to you, Subhashisa.
Thank you, Byron, and thank you, Chair, judges, and ladies and gentlemen. This is very interesting case put forward by Byron, and I have taken some notes. But my question is, why lottery? Because there is a huge chance of randomness. Are we asking to distribute public money? Not because a proposal is not sound, not ethical, or not likely to advance in a field, or just because just a number came up. I completely oppose this motion. Let us not forget about history. Let us not forget about the infamous, unethical trials happened in the past. How many of them they had proper ethical process of doing scientific research? And the purpose of science was being rational, evidence-based pursuit, peer review, and for all of its imperfection, it is grounded in expert evaluation. What I hear more, what I understood from the position was like it's more concentrated about the scientists, about the researchers. But what about the public? We are doing research for the public. Where are the balance and checks? Are there? What kind of research are doing? Are ethical? Are safe? And it has some value to the public. So for that we need expertise. For that we need a group who can evaluate all these applications and say that yes, this is good to go ahead and this is not. But if we replace that with randomness and we disregard the complexity of scientific research, that does not sound ethical. There has been studies. There are countries, and uh, Byron clearly mentioned there are countries who are trying to implement a lottery system, but unfortunately, there has been no conclusion around it, whether the lottery system is better than the peer reviewed or not. My second question is who should do research? If there is a lottery system in place, how do you define that the person who is proposing the idea is capable enough to do the research? What is the quality? Is there any filter mechanism for that? How the research design was conceived? What was the scientific merit about it? And if we rely on purely lottery system, and I think that increases the risk of allocating the resources we have, which is very limited, and we might allocate research to some proposal or some researchers who do not have good research ideas or good research design. And I think that is absolutely wastage of public money. And also we are damaging the reputation of science because we are again including a chance here. And do we need that? Do we need that chance in doing some experiment in terms of investing money on something? And because every research requires a time, requires money, how do we ensure that quality is there in lottery system? The third thing is public trust and legitimacy, because we want public to accept that their money is being used in proper way, and they should believe that the science is for them, and it comes with a responsibility to use this resource wisely. And this is the responsibility falls upon the expert groups or the peer reviewed to make sure that a good number of people are selected so that they can get the money and they can use it in a responsible way to get the desired outcome. But I don't think the lottery system is fair on the surface. It may look fair on the surface, but it risks undermining the legitimacy of entire research system. And there has been a lot of mention about bias, and they said there is a reduced bias in selection. Of course, it can reduce bias and increase fairness, but where is the proof? The recent studies shows that the most scientists are not for pure randomness and only support random elements if combined with peer review. So far this concept of lottery system has not been studied very well, and scientists believe that only their peers can access the originality and the viability of research ideas, and pure randomization is incompatible with scientific principles. So how far that reduces the bias, we do not know. And the kind of bias was mentioned, was it really a bias? Or was it a selection criteria people follow so that a good application should go through? So we need to carefully think about what kind of word we are using in terms of the selection. Of course, peer review has its own problem. It's it's a tedious process. It's a long process. There's a chance people invest a lot, but the question is, we should not get rid of it completely, and we should not replace it with a lottery system. How we thought about any hybrid mechanism? Can we do some reform? Can we strengthen our peer reviewed mechanism? Can we make it faster for some of the application? We can design, and we need to have more flexible approach in peer review design, depending on the need and depending on the criteria we were looking for. And my colleague mentioned about the money, because it's going to save a lot of money, because the peer reviewed process takes a lot of administrative process, and that's a 12 to 20% of time the money is invested in that. But the question is again comes under, where is the excellence, where is the creativity, what is the parameter in place that the project or the funding we are giving to lottery system are going to be implemented. So by removing the expert evaluation, we risk discouraging the researchers from striving for high standard, knowing that the funding may ultimately come down to luck rather than the merit. And this is not the culture we want to uh, put into the innovation. And I'm not sure how many groundbreaking research can happen just because of lottery system. So to conclude, while peer review is imperfect, I think it is the best mechanism we have so far, because the research funding is the money of the public, and we are accountable to spend it wisely, ethically, on a merit basis and scientific judgment, because this is the taxpayers' money. So that demands we might look for a better peer review, not bingo, not just lottery. So rather than leaving the future of science to a chance, let us focus on reforming, strengthening the peer review to better solve. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Subhashish. So we've heard the first arguments there, a strong case from Byron that we would save money and have a fairer system with less bias. Subhashish, who argues there that peer review is still more effective, but could potentially be improved upon, certainly, and that is still the best system. So, Byron, we're going to go back to you now to respond to Subhashish's points from his opening statement.
Thank you, Adam, and thanks, Subhashish, for the arguments. I'm actually fully behind a lot of those principles, of course, like trust in science, appropriate use of public money, quality, and creativity and innovation. I don't necessarily think that a peer review system puts at risk any of those things if it's managed properly. I also think underpinning some of those arguments is a slightly pessimistic view of our scientific community, that we might just deliver second-rate science, slapdash science, just purely because we're in with a chance of getting some money. I would hope that most of us are motivated to do the best work that we can. But we do not have to give out the money in a lottery and forget about it. That's not part of what I would propose. As I said, as scientists, we would have a real solemn responsibility to handle the money appropriately, and there could be a lot more emphasis and a lot more resource placed on ensuring research outcomes are delivered as promised or as proposed. And if you don't do that, I would argue there should be a pretty harsh penalty if you've not done what you said you were going to do with the money, and there's no good reason for it. With regard to ethical research, we have ethics committees. You can't do research without an ethical approval anyway. And with regard to having a strategy, we could have themed calls. You can still develop a strategy nationally or around a particular theme and have a lottery related within that theme. What constitutes the best science is also, I suppose, open to bias. So that would maybe be an argument for a much wider lottery. That's the sort of thing, I think, where far from stifling creativity, a lottery can help people innovate. And really, a lot of funders, I think, aspire for out of the box thinking, but I think when you're handling money, it's really easy to be conservative with it, and I totally get it. I think a lottery system would just free up free us of that natural conservatism, which I think is appropriate. Which I think is well meaning. I think public trust comes from the outcomes. I don't think it's about chucking money at people and just forgetting about what's done with it. I think public trust is our responsibility. In receiving public money, you deliver what you say you were going to deliver. You propose high quality science because you've had training and you work at an institution that supports that. So there could be a quality commitment from universities where people work. There could be some basic requirements in order to be eligible to be in a lottery, but it's our responsibility to be responsible to deliver science that's good for the public, and that's what drives trust. Lastly, I think peer review. Actually, that was all of my. I already did strategy, didn't I? Yes. I'm sorry. Okay.
Oh, that's good because you're exactly out of time as well. So thank you very much.
Okay.
So, Ashish, do you want to respond to Byron's points on if you haven't already?
Definitely, and it sounds like there is little bit change in what was mentioned. But I would ask you this question. Let us just imagine you opened a call, and the call is purely lottery basis. And you did mention about having a committee at the university level or at different level to ensure there is a quality of research comes to the application. Is that not that you're introducing some sort of peer review process here? Maybe within the institution or maybe externally within your grant committee, but still you're trying to put a filter mechanism so that those who are applying to the lottery system, they are having you're getting good application. So what I mean to say is that pure lottery system may not be the best mechanism to work with. Perhaps there is a need of a peer review internally or maybe externally or maybe both. Uh, I would, and what I understood from all the points you did mention about, there's a lot of structural reform we need for lottery system to be in place. But is there any evidence that all the research we been awarded through lottery system, what is the completion rate? Is there any evidence around it? What is the rate of translation of this kind of research into practice? What is the adherence to ethical practice and all these things? Is there any evidence? We don't have any evidence around it yet. So I think this is one thing we need to consider, because we have very stringent mechanism for peer review, and very measurable process outcome in place. But in terms of lottery system, we don't have all these things, and this is very new. And perhaps yes, we may gamble with a small project or something, and we can give lottery to do something. But when it comes to real science and innovation, I still think it is a huge risk. But having said that, no system standalone is the perfect. Perhaps there is a need of mixing of these two together.
Thank you very much. Okay, great points made on both sides. Let's tease this out a little bit. Byron, are you suggesting that, because when we talk about a lottery system, I can understand that people might be a little bit confused by this. Are you suggesting that a funder puts out a funding call, they collect up the replies, they put all the replies into a hat, and they pull out a name out of the hat, and that's the one who gets the funding? Is that what you're suggesting?
Yes. Yeah, so I think that you put out a funding call. In order to put your name into the hat, you are obliged, but let's say that it's a self-certification because we're all professionals. You are
Okay.
obliged to have a research project that matches that call, that's fully planned out, that you're able to start within a given time frame. Your institution supports you, and your institution is a legit one that has the capability to support your research, um, and that it's aligned with the strategy of whatever that call is.
Okay, so what we're suggesting is there has to be some kind of pre-qualification stage. You've got to qualify as being somebody eligible to apply for that grant, and the research has to have gone through some kind of fundability check. No, as
No,
long as it meets the criteria and is from somebody who is eligible to apply.
yes, and it's your responsibility as an applicant to make sure you can deliver that project.
That's the proposal.
We can talk about exactly what that would look like, but if you don't deliver that project, you've in my view, there would be a pretty severe penalty.
Okay, Subhashis, you wanted to come back on that point.
Definitely, and I think there is a huge risk involved here. Let us say you are doing this lottery system, and the application got selected by chance. It's not very strong. They have lot of they don't have very rigorous scientific process in place. Is it not that we are risking? I would rather be safe than doing some kind of experiment with people's life, or that kind of thing, because one bad experiment can damage the reputation. Even though you can have a lot of you did mention about punishment and everything, but why to risk that? Yes,
Subhashis,
I mean,
would that potentially though also make us a little bit more innovative potentially in our ideas? Are we a little bit in our current system? Is there a single way of thinking that might disadvantage studies which are slightly higher risk, or come at this from a completely unexpected angle that that peer review wouldn't favor those kind?
yeah, that is possible, but I think that would not be completely solved by lottery system. Yes, if there is an innovation project, the first stage of the project could be through the lottery system. And if you select 10 applications for the innovation, then you peer review all these 10 applications. I mean, the outcome of these 10, then you can fund them more to do better research, to improve the innovation later. So I think there has to be combination of these two, rather than purely relying on lottery system so that they
Yeah.
complete the innovation.
Do you think, Byron, that this lottery system could be manipulated in so much as what we would see instead would be funding calls that almost specified the research that they wanted done, and also that researchers clearly would be advantaged from the more applications they submitted, the better your chance of being funded. So what kind of rules would you put in place with this? Is it like you can only put one application in, or could you put in 10?
I think to your first point about manipulation, from the funding body
Well,
would
I
then.
think. Do you think there are certain funding calls that would lend itself more to a lottery type system? Say, for example, fellowships.
Yeah.
We know that there are far fewer fellowships. They're probably the most competitive of grants out there, and that I know anecdotally
Mm.
that probably 80% of the people were fundable, but they're just
Yeah.
in fellowships. It's generally the case that there's not enough money to go around to fund everybody. It's not always the case for other funding calls. I know from being involved with the NIHR, not every grant gets fully spent, because not every funding call is fully spent because the research didn't meet the quality that they wanted, so not all the money goes. So do you think there are some funding calls that lend themselves more to this process than others? And would we see funding calls criteria start to become far more stiff? At the moment, for example, Alzheimer's Research UK will put out a funding call that says program grants. And that's generally it. You can put in for whatever you like within that broad remit.
Yep. So I think it would naturally benefit if you're really looking for research that is off on a tangent from what you usually do, is very blue sky, and you really want to encourage people to just be thinking like totally out the box around a particular challenge, or even more broadly than that, because I think then you can be free of the natural kind of constrained thinking around a particular topic that might be driven by decades of a direction in a particular field or something like that. The kind of baggage, if you like, you can just forget about it, and it opens up innovation in that way. The other part, I think, is probably ECR funding. That I think this would be really beneficial for. Reason being, you can think of I think the time is a really important one here. So actually, for ECRs, maybe, like don't spend the time writing a project. Although I appreciate maybe that in itself is good training.
Well, I'm guessing.
So I think that's an important. So you could have
Yeah.
the project written and it could go into a lottery. I think you got to write the project as an ECR, because if we're talking about a system where we're selecting lottery in for a certain type of funding call, but I think in that instance, I think it would be fairer. I think to where you've got a situation where you've got a lot of applications that are fundable. How do they really get what factors really are
Well,
in
that's
play?
where I guess your points about the reviewers. I mean, because they're not anonymized as it stands at the moment, the reviewers know applicants and there might be bias creeping. I mean, I know that people do declare, and we're all professionals, and people will say, I have to declare, and they'll leave the room and things. So, Ashish, you were going to come back on those points.
Definitely, I think this is interesting point, but I would like to ask everyone a story. Yes, everyone has to submit a proposal, but how do you make sure which one is good and which one is not good? I mean, I'm talking about the depth of the proposal, the depth of the scientific approach people have put in the proposal. So for each year, yes, we invest a lot of time in developing proposals for peer review process. But if I spent a lot of time in developing a quality research, but I know that someone else had just developed used ChatGPT to write the proposal, but they got the funding because of the lottery system. I did not get it. Is it not that harming the moral of the issuers? Because they are working hard. They have done like 10 years work. They know in and out of the science. They're doing a lot. But then is it not, are we
But
not discouraging that scientific brain here?
can I argue at the moment that does that system not exist at the moment? Do you not feel already that when you put in a funding call that it's very good, and then you see the people who did get the funding, do you not already feel like my research was better than that, or my research was better, I should have got funding they shouldn't have? So at least with a lottery system, you'd know it wasn't anything you did wrong. It was just the luck of the draw.
But I think that would increase that disparity rather than reducing that disparity, because this is purely by luck. You don't know. But
Do we
yeah,
do we see at the moment that funding is would do we well question to both of you. Do we think at the moment that would a lottery system address bias towards certain institutions as well? Do we see that the same institutions? So you both, Byron, no disrespect to Brunel University, but not necessarily one of the bigger name universities you would expect in the dementia field. Up and coming, now that Byron is there, of course. Subhashisa, you're in Oxford University, one that, attracts
Some
lots
people have
of
heard of.
research funding. Would a lottery system address institutional bias? Does
no,
institutional bias exist?
I think it would not, because I mean, people coming from smarter institutions and they got better infrastructure, they're gonna put more application in, so that would reduce the chances of
Because
other
they've got more
universities.
researchers.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it would not reduce the bias, because look, statistically the randomness would gonna increase. This
Well,
I
it's
just
not
want
a
to remind.
bias.
I'm going to come back to you, Byron. I just want to remind the audience you've got a chance to put your questions and points forward as well. Please do those in the Q&A. And Byron, I'm going to come back to you.
Well, I suppose it's not a bias if it's proportional. Like if Oxford University are obviously going to put in hundreds of applications and they get a random an appropriate proportion. But also on the point of like quality, I think a lot of what you're saying, Subhashish, kind of implies that there'll just be an influx of terrible applications from really poorly qualified. But are we really that community? I
we
because
are
assuming
not.
nothing changes about the landscape of
Yeah,
who's doing research, right? If we just
yeah.
did this tomorrow, um, do we really believe we're in a situation where there are terrible applications that go into funding bodies overwhelmingly? Because if you're worried about a sudden rise, you'd have to assume there's a really high proportion of
Yeah,
really low quality applications
yeah.
going around.
Okay, I would answer to your first question about the bias and randomness. I think in lottery system we are not giving any scope to have a bias, but in other way we are including the randomness. The randomness is also a kind of biasness, because we're including that, increasing the chances of having all this selection, more influx of application and more good universities, so that reduces the chances of other universities or other people getting that selection. The second thing is what you mentioned about the influx of application. Yes, may not be today or may not be next year, but we need to also think about we're creating a system for the future, and that is going to encourage a lot of people not to do real science work. A lot of people would think that, oh, it's just a lottery. There's a 50% chance. I just do something using something, and I'll just put. There's a 50% chance I can get it. That is the future generation we are going to create, and I think we need to have a stringent policy here. What are we going to create? Yes, maybe today most of people are trained, and they know how to write, and they are very serious about it. But in the future, do we have that process? So again, I would say relying on lottery process solely would create that
So
problem.
the point here then is that there will be some researchers that work on a very great grant that could potentially be groundbreaking and put a lot of time and effort into it, and then others that put less effort into something, they throw something in at the last minute because, hey, we all still need to attract funding, and without that peer review step, study B that's not very good gets funded and study A doesn't. How do you address quality, Byron? How do you address those risks of quality in that system?
I suspect in the former case that there's a lot of people who feel that happens anyway.
Yeah, probably.
Not, and this is the problem, right? Objectively, how do you know, right? Everybody, we all know, like, oh, I don't know. I guess if you put in a grant application, you think it's good and you think it's worth funding, surely, if you spent hours and hours writing it. But not most of the time, it doesn't get funded. And that's a reality probably for everybody. And that would surely mean in the current system, great ideas don't get funded because most ideas don't. Um, so you've got a situation where unless you truly believe that the current system is 100%, I mean, it's effective in selecting from all that pool the very, very best ideas and not missing any, then I, yeah, I think then
Would
I think
would an,
yeah.
would
Sorry.
an alternative to or a kind of lottery system be a larger? So at the moment, a grant review panel involves however many people. I'm guessing you put in a grant, it goes through an initial screening to check that they've ticked all the right boxes, that it qualifies. Then they go out for peer review and as I understand it, because Alzheimer's Research UK are very transparent on this, you can go and watch their peer review process in action. Generally speaking, there's a dozen people. The grants are distributed out across those people. Somebody will then review one person might be given 3 to 5 grants to review in real depth. Then they come back and present that to everybody, and there's a kind of vote kind of thing, and they get funded. But that does mean that you come down to a dozen. It's still down to a small number of people. Would an alternative to have a much larger pool of people, you kind of open this up and say, right, our grant review panel is 100 people, which includes lay people and experts, and everybody gets sent it, and you have like a big doodle poll to decide which do you think. So it's kind of more voices in there from a more diverse group of people, but it falls short of lottery. I don't know. What would both of your views on a hybrid system? Go on, Subhashisa.
Yeah, I think there's one more thing I would like to emphasize here, and I did mention about it. The research not only delivers the science, it also create a person, it creates a researcher. What is the mechanism we have in lottery system so that evaluates that person who is going to do the research? It's not
Well, I
only
think this
about
comes
yeah.
back to the idea of pre-qualifying, isn't it? Or
So
maybe,
that's yeah. So that is again a peer review process. There is a screening process. So that means it has to be a hybrid approach. You can't have only lottery system.
I think if you're, I think, I think there's a real place for a lottery system in driving some competition and bringing new people in and developing early career researchers and giving them an in to this process, because I guess the biggest predictor of getting a grant is probably having had one, and it's getting that foot in, and so maybe the place for it is among the early career community with small grants, And you could even argue that then actually just give bigger block grants to universities and distribute the rest of the small grants via lottery to early career researchers, who can then access those bigger institutional funds, or have the standard peer review system, but take out a chunk of money, distribute it by lottery to ECRs. It could drive competition in smaller institutions, get people's research groups up and running, and then they've got a foot to compete in the peer review process.
I'm going to go now to our audience. Lauren's been very patient. Hi, Lauren. If you'd like to join us, Lauren, I can invite you to the stage if you'd like to physically come on. Drop me a line in the chat if you do. I'm going to flash up Lauren's question on the screen, which is, what are your thoughts on a lottery system for smaller pilot grants that can encourage out-of-the-box thinking but would lead to larger grant applications? So not giving away the millions on a random chance, but those kind of smaller grants where there's not a lot to choose between them. Would you both support lottery for those types of grants?
I do.
Yeah.
You do.
Yeah. I think so, because I think it can.
Can I add to that? What about fellowships?
No.
You wouldn't for fellowships?
No.
What about for fellowships if once you'd ascertained that it was fundable? So, the peer review process agreed all of these people meet eligibility criteria to be funded. And so now we're not going to vote on who gets it. We're going to put all the names into a hat and pull out the names at that point.
Yes. Those who meet the threshold criteria, yes.
You would.
Yeah.
I'm going to flag up Lauren's the only one commenting at the moment. I'm going to spotlight another point, which is Lauren. Oh, you're good with not appearing on camera.
Does Lauren
Lauren.
Does Lauren want to come?
Challenge the statement. Lauren would like to challenge the statement that the lottery randomness of a lottery would proportionally benefit Oxford, Cambridge type universities. They are only mid-sized universities. They get the majority of funding in the UK at the moment, and they're extremely well-equipped universities across the country. Many post-92 universities that just don't get the funding success. And I can see that being a good point. There have been some grant announcements recently, and where you couldn't help but notice it's the same 5 institutions once time again. But that's because those are the institutions that are doing more work in that area. What are your views on this?
I suppose it's hard to break from a track record of funding and infrastructure and everything that goes with that, because that's a part, an environment is part of funding criteria. But I think then, coming back to Lauren's previous suggestion, that a lottery for smaller grants could give individuals and institutions a leg up to compete, and it could drive competition. Like more people doing stuff is good for science.
We had a question sent to me earlier, which I put in here so I can put it up on the screen, which is, do funders risk losing credibility if they move away from peer review? Are we just a bit entrenched? Is it too scary to try and change this? What do we think? Are they going to have to be brave to do that? Would they lose their reputation if they moved away from a peer review system? What do you think, Subhashisa?
I think yes, because again, we are talking about a chance. But if we explain, perhaps, if we explain the newer method, but there has to be some element of peer reviewed at early stage or later stage. But if you totally rely on lottery, I think yes, that would reduce the credibility of funders internationally.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think credibility would be linked to research outcomes. So if you played it carefully, maybe you could mitigate that. But I can also see the risk for sure.
We're out of time nearly. I'm going to give you both a minute to make your closing statements. While that's going on, I'm going to post in the chat here for you to cast your votes in the final poll to see. Just a little reminder before we go back to that. It actually ended up being 50-50 in the opening vote. The final closing on opening votes was 50-50. So have your vote now in the closing. But while we're going to do that, we're going to hear from Byron first with your closing statement, Byron.
Okay. Well, thanks, Subhashisa, for the really interesting discussion, and Adam for facilitating. I've taken on board a lot of what was said. I am still going to advocate for a lottery system. I think what's become clear is that there's a technical thing here in the topic of the debate about peer review. This being the process of academic peers commenting, but could we have more permanent members of funding agencies delivering the strategy and providing some kind of quality check that's technically wouldn't be a peer review, and let's, for the sake of moving forward my position, let's say peer review is to get ECRs on the ladder to drive competition in that early stage research. I think we can. I'm sorry, lotteries are for that. Let's take peer review out of the picture altogether. Another system I've seen advocated for is big block grants for institutions, and that are accessible for senior researchers, and then research councils distribute their money, smaller amounts, by peer review, focusing on early career researchers, freeing up their time from writing applications, injecting funding into their ideas, and driving novelty, driving innovation, driving creativity, and getting them a foot on the ladder.
Thank you very much, Byron. Subhashisa?
Well, thank you for the opportunity. I would say that there is no direct answer or one answer to the funding selection. I think there is a need of both, and also depends on what kind of research are we trying to fund, and what is the priority. So for example, we did discuss about we can have a two-stage system. We can do the lottery system at the beginning, where we give some sort of seed fund to the people so that they can do some research. Then we look at the output, do the peer review, then we give more money to them to go ahead. I think we need that kind of hybrid mechanism where everyone gets a fair chance. If that is the problem, then yes, later on the merit or the deserved people only get the funding so that they can use it in responsible way.
Thank you very much. So, just last chance for our audience members to cast their vote. And I will share my screen. I'm going to give it one more minute. While we're waiting for you to cast your vote, I'm going to remind you of two more debates. Next week's Salon debate will be back here at the same time, same place, 8 p.m. on Wednesday. And we're actually talking about peer review again this time, but not in the context of grant funding, but in terms of papers. And this house believes the peer review system is beyond reform and should be scrapped altogether. Which is going to be an interesting one. Arguing two sides of that, we have Gareth O'Brien from, I think he's from King's, and Evelina Valiante from Southampton, who are both going to argue that this time next Wednesday. And then on the 17th of December, we have our Christmas special. Tickets for that are actually going to be sold. We're selling tickets. We're not giving them away. It's £5 to attend. But what that £5 does is it will be donated to Admiral Nurses and to Dementia UK, who provide such a fantastic service, particularly over Christmas when families living with dementia need support, and it's much needed and very well provided by the Admiral Nurses at Dementia UK. So it's £5 a ticket. And the reason why you should come is because we're debating whether Santa Claus would make a good PI or not. There are lots of really interesting points when you start to delve into Santa's morality, his ethics, his work ethic, and why you would be a good PI or not. I think it's going to be lots of fun. We're going to have Anna Volkmer, Connor Richardson, Rebecca Williams, and Jodie Watt are going to join me for that debate, and that's going to be on the 17th of December at 12 p.m. So please do buy a ticket. And do you know what? Even if you can't come and you're not interested, buy a ticket anyway, because it's £5 and it's going to Dementia UK and Admiral Nurses, and they could use that money very well. So that's enough of the plugs for next week and Christmas. Let's go and share our final poll results now and see where our audience stands. Are you ready? So we asked, this house believes grant funding should be distributed by lottery and not peer review. We've heard very good arguments from Byron, who argues that it would reduce bias and give higher risk research a chance, and it would promote more other institutions would attract that funding. We've heard Subhashisa, who worries about the quality of research that would come down, that would lower, and the gaming that might happen across the system for that. And our audience have now voted. At the start, the poll results were that 50% agreed, 50% disagreed. And at the end, 38% agree, 38% are undecided, and 25% disagree. So, Subhashisa, I think you've both lost a few voters there, some of which have become a little bit undecided. Your arguments have clearly muddied the water, so much so that people now are more undecided than ever before, which is exactly what the point of these debates is supposed to be. It's supposed to be to inspire discussion and debate, and to encourage you to think about things that are going on in the research system. And I think that's exactly what tonight's debate has done. But our congratulations, I guess, slightly with Byron, who seems to have swayed more of the audience towards your opinion than Subhashisa. I think you lost a few people there, Subhashisa, whereas Byron retained his audience, his supporters. But congratulations, both of you, for making a really good arguments this evening. For me, I always like to lump down my view is, I think somewhere in the middle would be good. I think there are definitely some funding calls that would be a little bit fairer if there was a little bit more randomness and chance to it. However, what we absolutely can't do is compromise on quality. So we need to find a system that's the in-between, that still ensures the quality, but reduces the potential, even if it's unconscious bias that does creep into grant review boards, that we know, whether that's because of the institution the grant's coming from, the person it's coming from, the research it's trying to do. I think there are biases in the system, and some grant review, a lottery system might address some of those. I don't know. As ever with these debates, there's never one size fits all. It's always somewhere in the middle. Thank you so much, though, for sticking with us this evening, to the incredible Dr. Byron Creese and the amazing Dr. Subhashisa Swain. You've both been brilliant debaters this evening, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Good night.
you.
Bye.
Thanks. Take care. Bye-bye.